Hello and welcome to From the Be-All End, back from the international break with a bang and ready to look ahead to the big game at Sheffield Wednesday and to look back on a little things that have been going on over the last week or so. With me, Justin Connolly, Paul Woodhouse and Chris Borden. Gentlemen, the main news coming out, Alan Nixon had a report and I think it's fairly well confirmed that Chris Crasper is the new head of the academy at Burnley. Former guest on this podcast, as well as being, of course, very well known to Burnley fans through his family connections. His father, of course, Frank, a former player and assistant manager and manager. Long-standing associations with the Casper family, including the young lad in goal as well at the moment at the club. Chris Borden, what do you make of Chris Casper coming into that role?
Well, on the face of it, it looks a very, very astute appointment. He, knows the game inside out. He's served at various levels. Obviously his playing career was cut cruelly short. But he, at the time, he was getting a good taste of football in probably one of the best the best English sides we've seen in the last sort of 25, 30 years or so. He's obviously he's had a very good upbringing. Team Bath, is it? He sort of he looked after. He's been involved at Salford with his old mates from Manchester United, and it's always nice to have someone who knows the town, knows the club, and has his finger on the pulse of the place really. So fingers crossed. It's about getting players through the system, and you get judged on that ultimately. But I think people will be rather pleased to see that appointment.
Yeah, I think his role at Salford, when he was on the pod, he was talking about, it's was quite a multifaceted role he had there, which included sort of developing talent and lots of other factors as well that he was involved in. And he was a manager briefly, wasn't he, at Bury, very young, still in his 20s, I think, before it was sort of fashionable for managers of that age, and did pretty well with it. Obviously knows the game really well, and I think he's done loads of those courses as well. So he'll be well up to date with all the academy rules and the different categories and all that side of it. But Woody, what's your reaction when a Casper gets a role at Burnley?
It's one of those, isn't it? That considering we feel that there's been quite a lot of the club being torn out, just to hear an old name, just an affiliation with Burnley, seems to be the right step forward these days, doesn't it? So, like you say, he's got a lot of experience coaching wise, and could be an extremely good fit, all told, and it could be a great move for him, hopefully.
Yeah, Justin, we haven't had a lot out of that academy, have we? Though, if you look over the years, for a club that used to pride itself on producing young talent, there hasn't been a lot, has there? We look at players who've come through. The most noticeable one would be J-Rod, obviously, but Dwight McNeil was partly in it. Between J-Rod and Dwight McNeil, there's a good decade and a bit there, and there was nothing, was there really? But it's quite a big job, isn't it? If the club's got this sustainable future that we hope the club has, producing their own players, it's got to be a priority, surely.
Absolutely. That's what I was going to say. I was going to say, well, it sounds like on paper it's a decent appointment. He's had an impact at Salford City. They've been on the up, haven't they? They've got into the Football League and done quite well there. But we need to see some players coming through from that academy, making the grade for us. I think I'm probably right in saying Chris will know more about this, obviously, than any of us. But I think I'm right in saying that a few players have come through and had careers, and developed into like professional footballers, but elsewhere there's not been any that have sort of really made the grade for us. And I think that's a sign of a club that's run successfully in the background. When players start coming through the academy and start making the grade, it shows, that scouting talent, and it shows that coaching ability to get the players up to the required standard. So we need to be spotting them. We need to be bringing them up, bringing them through. And we need to be producing some homegrown talent that can make it in our first team. I think that's essential to the model, isn't it? So yeah, maybe hopefully this is a step in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, what do you think's been going wrong over the years at that academy? Because like Justin says, there have been players who've gone on to have careers, but they've often been at a lower level than Burnley, haven't they? Sometimes a very low level. There's plenty of former Burnley academy players pottering around in non-league football, and in League One and League Two. But what's been going wrong? Why haven't we been able to, under successive regimes and different managers?
Yeah. I think it's. I mean, like say you mentioned that the likes of. I mean, Alex McDonald's had a fabulous career, sort of lower league journeyman. Following Steve Evans everywhere he goes at the moment, and Burnley have made money on the likes of Jimmy Dunn and Josh Benson, who had a taste of it. And I mean, Dunn looked like a decent prospect, but unfortunately, I mean, like say you go back to that sort of. Well, you're going back 20 years or so, almost, to that sort of spurt of a few players that Burnley had. Where, Richard Chaplow emerged, and Chris McCann, Kyle Lafferty, Jay, and they were in that sort of little sweet spot, really, where, I mean, Burnley was sort of hovering, but they were flirting with the wrong end of the table, but ultimately were safe, and at the time weren't really going to be knocking on the door for the playoffs or a promotion charge either. So you can blood players in that situation. If you remember, I mean, Chappie was a needs must. I mean, he was a good player, but it was a needs must job. They couldn't afford players, couldn't bring anyone in, and he was good enough to he showed enough to establish himself and earn a very good move. And same with Chris McCann and Lafferty, that they were sort of drip fed into it. But I remember speaking to Steve Cottle, and he sort of said, you when you're in that situation, and you're sort of in no man's land in the Championship, you can blood players, and you can give them a run of sort of 50 games or so, and 100 games even maybe at times, and they can make mistakes on the job because it's not absolutely critical. And they did make mistakes, and they learned from it, and they became very good players. Kyle Lafferty, I mean, at the time, he made Burnley a fabulous amount of money, which would, the finances of the club at the time, it was a huge deal for Burnley when he went to Rangers, and Burnley never looked back really on the back of that. But they've never really had that situation since where you can sort of drop players in and it not matter almost. If you're fighting for promotion, he's trying to stay in the Premier League or pushing for top 10 in the Premier League. It's not a great environment to be blooding kids hoping for the best, really. So they need opportunity first and foremost, and if that opportunity is not quite there, you've got to be. Dwight McNeil was good enough. He got his opportunity. He got a bit of a taste in Europe, and he really kicked on. But again, he had to sort of wait 3-4 months after that opening sort of flood of games before he really, he won over the trust of Sean Dyche. It's a tricky one. It's a tricky one, but it's unless you're an absolute, absolute beast like a Wayne Rooney, and you just simply have to be played because you're that good. They say John Kofi was knocking. They sold John Kofi to Manchester United it was Steve Cottrell's last act basically at the end of 2007. And he was sort of making noises, Steve, that John Kofi would have been in the first team in the coming January, February time. And I think he was still sort of, it was just about 16, if memory serves me right. But he was sort of that good at the time, they thought. That bit of pace and, a bit of strength despite his age. And they just thought it was just, he was, like you remember like that sort of Theo Walcott at a similar time, that sort of pace that devastates, you just can't ignore it really. But, they got again, if off the top of my head, I think it was about £1 million all told from Manchester United. And unfortunately for the lad, he had a few injury setbacks, and it never quite happened for him at United or elsewhere, really. But yeah, it's not necessarily down to the talent or the coaches. It's the situation that the first team is in, unfortunately.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about the recruitment as well, because that'll have got a lot more difficult over the last few years, I think, with the big clubs sweep up so many players, don't they, as well? You know, you look at the sizes of their academies and the different age groups they have, and kids, like, I mean, almost everybody in East Lancashire knows someone whose son is part of an academy system somewhere these days. I mean, it's incredible the size of clubs. Like, you go past when I used to go and cover games at City, and you'd see so many games going on at their training grounds with like 11-year-olds and so on. It's completely different from the days when Burnley used to invite players at Easter to come down from the northeast to Gawthorpe, and you'd have these trialist games. I saw a couple of those over the years, and then one or two of them would pop up a month or two later in the B team or the A team. Totally different days, and it's very competitive. And kids by the age of 15 have sometimes played for 3 or 4 clubs, you know. And when I was at Everton, and then I went to City, and you're talking about a 12-year-old, it's a different environment altogether. So I think maybe Chris will have some interesting perspectives on you know what markets, as it were, they should be looking in for young players, as well as the obvious one of our own East Lancashire market.
So you only have to look at, obviously, Chris himself. I mean, you know, you're looking at players who've emerged from the town over the last sort of 30 years. I mean, Chris was plucked by Manchester United and part of the greatest youth team we probably will ever see.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and Ollie Norwood, you know, likewise was of such ability that Manchester United plucked him. I think John Mullin was he at St. Ted's? John Mullin. I think.
Local school, anyway.
Yeah, and so obviously, you know, John came through the area, through the system, etc. But like I said, the top players from the area there's a team on the English schools, probably going back a decade or so ago from St. Ted's, and I think half of them ended up at Blackburn because they had a better academy, a better system at the time, and a few of those, you know, Willem Tomlinson, who ended up at Chorley, young Mansell, he was at Accrington Stanley a couple of years ago, I think, and it's difficult, isn't it? So we're literally, how many clubs are within sort of 30 miles of us as well, and elite clubs as well.
Yeah, global-sized clubs just down the road, really. I mean, it's one of those, isn't it, Woody, when you explain to Americans about where Burnley is and how close it is to, you know, there's nothing.
They are always quite shocked, and once you do start explaining it, it is quite shocking, isn't it? Because for them, the idea of just being 40 miles away, that would be a local club to them, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's a
Blackburn just be another suburb of whatever city you're living in, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Well, best of luck to Chris Crasper. It's a fascinating challenge for him and an important one for the club, I think, as well. Let's look a little bit at the current team then. We've been on the international break. Lyle Foster picking up a knock with South Africa that not quite sure yet how serious it is, but Scott Parker saying he will be out of the game against Sheffield Wednesday. But we also had another African striker in action, Andréas Hountondji, who was playing for the Benin national team and scored a couple of goals, a goal in each of 2 games. Come back full of confidence as a result of that, according to Scott Parker. Justin, would you be tempted to finally have a look at Hountondji? If Lyle Foster's not available, somebody's got to play at centre forward, and he's come back with 2 goals under his belt. Admittedly, we've no idea what level of opponent they were against, but it's an interesting coincidence, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you always look at injuries as being an opportunity for somebody else to have a go and see what they can do. I don't think we've seen enough of Hountondji to make a proper assessment of whether he's going to make it at this level. I mean, we've only seen him very, very briefly, and most of us will remember a glaring miss. But like I said at the time, at least he was in that position to get the chance, which is something that Foster's struggled a little bit to do, hasn't he, this season? He's not had a great start to the season. Chances have been few and far between. So you expect, to be honest, I would expect him to go with J-Rod probably, but I don't see why you wouldn't give him a go. I don't think there are any games that are better or worse for sort of, giving people a chance. It's going to be every game we play is going to be tough. It's going to be tough at Sheffield Wednesday away from home. But like you say, if he's got a couple of goals on the international break, and that's going to be a boost for his confidence. So why not? Why not give him a go? If he's in the first team squad, he ought to be in consideration for a spot, shouldn't he? Otherwise, what's he doing at the club?
I mean, it's fair comment, I think, isn't it, Woody, that we don't really know. We've seen him. It's not easy coming off the bench. I mean, you're in a new country at a new club, and your only moments of football is little 10, 15-minute flickers here and there coming off the bench. It's really very unfair of us to be drawing conclusions about him, really.
It's asking a lot of him, isn't it? These little cameos. Granted, that miss at Oxford, wasn't it?
Yes,
that's definitely not going to help him. But to be fair, the two goals that I kind of fleetingly saw were him getting on the end of stuff.
Don't give us this fleetingly saw. You went online and searched out Hountondji's goals for Benin against Rwanda, and you found
I did.
You got him on the big screen.
I'm watching him right now. No, it's one of those, isn't it? He's probably absolutely knackered, having flown back there. So, that'll be him goose for another couple of weeks. But we're obviously very, very short. So he's going to get some kind of a chance. And hopefully it's more than a little bit of a cameo. And if he has got a little bit more confidence, and with everybody, it's pretty much a confidence game, isn't it? Then hopefully, he can do something. But
I mean, Foster was out for the Leeds game, wasn't he? And he went with Fleming up front, Chris. I mean, there's J-Rod, there's Fleming, and there's Hountondji, and I don't think there's any other realistic options at the moment for that position, is there, as a central striker? Fleming, we're told, is more of a second striker, stroke number 10. What do you think? What was your instincts telling you, Chris, on that?
Yeah, well, it's one of those. They've brought Fleming in to perform a particular job, I think, and so far we've seen him, like I say, as essentially a false nine, or he played pretty much, a back to goal central striker a lot of the time at Leeds. But I think they want to sort of start looking at him and start establishing him in that number 10 role realistically. So, do you then sort of say, yeah, well, we'll give Jay a couple of games, or do you say to this young kid, you see the celebrations, the lad's absolutely flying. That's the two tap-ins, but he's got to be at the right place at the right time to turn him in. Benin's biggest hero since Robbie Bocco now, isn't he? So he's absolutely buzzing, the lad. But it's like I say, he's played sort of left side. He's played wide of a forward 2 or 3, and let's see how he fares down the middle. If it's not happening, if he's completely caught in the lights, you can make changes. That's why you've got a bench, isn't it? Someone's identified something in him, age, potential, experience in France, international experience, etc. He talked very well when he was introduced in his signing interview, and if you don't have a look at these players, you're never going to know, are you? To me, it's one of those. I would, if I was a betting man, I'd probably go with experience, and I'd probably go with J-Rod. But I'd like to see a bit of a gamble, really.
Yeah, I mean, Hountondji's record last season, he was on loan at Rodez in the second division in the French league, on loan from Cannes, and scored 14 goals in 34 appearances, which is, a decent return. It's the French second division, which is not as good as the Championship, I think it's fair to say. But still, I agree. Let's have a look at him. I think we know what J-Rod can do. We're still at that stage of the season where we're trying to, Parker's trying to find answers, isn't he? Find possible solutions. He's got players hopefully going to be coming back. On that point, there is Delcroix back on the grass, and sounds like he's furthest along of the long-term injury people. So, but we seem reasonable. There's no urgency need to sort of throw him in a rush, is there?
No.
I don't see where unless you get an injury to Perez or something like that, I don't see how on earth he gets anywhere near the side, to be honest. But for, let's say, injury, suspension, etc., it's a long way down the list. Defensively,
we've been pretty solid as well, haven't we? It's been at the creative end of things that we've struggled a little bit. So, this Foster being out might change the dynamic to the point where things start to click a little bit. It sometimes happens that, doesn't it, where a change is forced upon you, and it turns out to be a blessing in disguise. So fingers crossed.
Not the secret weapon playing Roger Eli up front, and
glory days.
A cult hero is born. Yeah.
There you go. Could happen.
We'll be having Hountondji t-shirts in a couple of weeks. You might watch this space.
Clarets secret weapon. Yeah.
Not with that spelling.
Yeah. So Sheffield Wednesday. I'm sure we've all got different memories of games at Sheffield Wednesday. There's been some eventful ones down the years, but focusing on this version of Sheffield Wednesday, Chris, what's your scouting report?
Yeah, it's everything's all about the turnaround under the manager, isn't it? That everyone was impressed with his punditry in the summer at the Euros on the back of his survival battle at Sheffield Wednesday, and you look at his CV. He's been at Leipzig, he's been at Southampton, he's been at Bayern, he's been with the German national team, so he knows his onions, and it seems to be sort of he seems quite tactically versatile, but he's in that sort of very modern frame of mind where he's about trying to win the ball high up the pitch, high intensity, and about trying to play out from the back. And if we are going to make mistakes, and so be it. This is the way we're playing. We're persevering with it, and I think it's pleasant to watch by all accounts. But the results have been hit and miss. They obviously beat West Brom at Hillsborough a few weeks ago, but they did that super win on the opening night of the season, aren't they? With the walloped Plymouth as well. But it's we say it every week, don't it? It'll be another stern examination, I think. But again, you go in there certainly believing that Burnley can win the game and come back with a positive result. But they're going to have to improve on the performances of recent games, you'd imagine.
Yeah, he's an East German, actually, which is quite unusual. Come from Saxony football over there, and there haven't been many. I mean, 35-year-old German managers are quite in vogue, aren't they? There's a lot of young German managers working in Germany and abroad. Not many of them coming from that part of the country, which is curious. But Justin, looking at Wednesday, I mean, on top of. Aside from that, when we look at the league table, there they are. They're in 15th place, 3 wins from 9 games. We should be looking for points there, shouldn't we?
Yeah, I mean, we are all of a generation, aren't we? Where for like Sheffield Wednesday is a big club. They've vastly underachieved over the last 20 years, aren't they? In our day, they were sort of a top flight side that had some great players and did well. So it's they're one of those teams that sort of disappeared into the sort of lower divisions, and it's always a bit of a weird one. Why has that happened? What's happened to that club? Why have they spent so much time down in the lower divisions and struggled to get back to where where instinctively I feel, they should be. But, I think they've had a decent record at home, so that's going to make it difficult for us. But, we go into this game like we go into every game, not really knowing what's going to happen, but having full expectation that we're going to have too much for them. I'm a little bit nervous about our sort of ability to create chances. I think that's been the real sort of issue with our performances over the before the international break. And I think Sheffield Wednesday is the sort of place you go, and if you don't have that sort of creative cutting edge, you're really going to struggle. But it's just one of those. It's another one of those games. We've no idea what's going to happen. We don't know much about the opposition. We don't even know what our team's going to be. We don't really know a lot about the players we've got. So this is what's fantastic about the Championship, isn't it? It's so unpredictable. We went into so many games last season knowing exactly what was going to happen, and this year it seems like every week I'm thinking it seems really unpredictable to me. But on paper, we should have too much for them, shouldn't we? Really?
You would hope so, yeah. I mean, Woody, Sheffield Wednesday, Justin's right, isn't he? Like to me, anyway, they always felt like a bigger club than Sheffield United. And maybe it's just the eras that you're in. But I mean, my last sort of positive memories of Sheffield Wednesday would be, Waddle, Warhurst, maybe before that, John Sheridan, that team, and the team that knocked us out of the FA Cup semi-final or quarter-final. Can't remember which one it was.
Quarter-final, yeah.
Quarter-final, of course it was, yeah. After Steve Taylor missed a penalty on the turf and we went, I remember actually we played a school match. Might have even been against Chris Casper's brother Lee, who used to play he played for Edge End, didn't he, Woody? Did he play against him?
Yeah, I broke his shin pad once, apparently. Yeah. With obviously a well-timed challenge.
I wouldn't have survived a VAR review of some of my challenges on him. No, he was quite fast. but exactly. I remember leaving a game, one of those school games where you play at 5 o'clock or 4:30 after school, and then in muddy legs, still with muddy legs, jumping in the car and driving off to Sheffield Wednesday for that game, and we were 3-0 down at half time. It was a miserable one. It was that. But as an aside,
what are we asking me? Yeah.
Are we going to win?
It's one of those. It's like saying, we should have too much for them. But arguably, you could say this season we haven't had too much for anybody, and that's been our problem.
Yeah.
You look at Sheff Wednesday, and they've blown a little bit hot and cold, haven't they? But they've managed to bag a few. They've, like Chris was saying, they like to press higher up. And if there's one thing we've maybe struggled a little bit this year is with high pressing sides and us not necessarily moving the ball as quickly as we have been doing. We've been a little bit static, and people have been, sides have been able to press us a bit. So if they manage to do that and we don't catch them on the counter, then we may be under the cosh a little bit. But I still think there's more that we've seen more than enough in this side in spells for us to be able to catch sides on the counter. So, and to Justin's point, I haven't a clue.
We've got the pace. We've got the pace.
We've got the pace. We have the tools, as they say.
It was good to see. Yeah. So it was good to. I was reading this week in the Burnley Express. Mr. Scrafton, he'd run a piece with Scott Parker. It might be some quotes he'd had left over, I'm not sure, but he was just sort of talking about Collie Oshaw being the type of player who beats himself up, and I thought it was quite good to hear that. You want, I mean, we've seen he's obviously he's ambitious. He might well have moved in the summer, but you can see a player there who wants to develop as quickly as possible and be as good as he can be, and I like to see that. I like to see, you don't want him to be too hard on himself, but you want him to be analysing his game and wanting to improve. And you want to be like a sponge and soaking up everything you can, all the influences, the good influences. And there's a hell of a player there if they can, just sort of roughen up just sort of sandpaper over those edges a little, and decision making a lot of the time. End product we've spoken about, it's improved. He's added a couple of goals to his game and so on. But it's I just thought that was really nice, interesting insight really into his psyche.
Yeah, there is a rawness with Koleosho still, isn't there? Like, I mean, he wants to just get at people, which is brilliant to see and gets the crowd, involved in everything. But sometimes his decision making, cutting inside when he doesn't need to necessarily, and always looking to go on the dribble is exhilarating sometimes, but it can also be a bit frustrating. Yeah, I mean, Parker was talking as well in the Burnley Express, where he was asked a little bit about the criticism that came up after those last couple of disappointing performances, and he said, we're winning games and we've done exceptionally well considering where we were and currently where we are. I'm more than happy. We live in a world where everyone wants to pick up on little negatives and try and make a spin of that, but I'm really happy with the team and the areas we're getting into, so it's all part of it. I mean, that sounds to me, Justin, like somebody who he's been asked about the criticism, hasn't he? I don't think he's coming out and wanting to talk about the criticism, but he's still throwing it back to that point that what a mess things were after the transfer window, and you've got to put it in that context, really, which is fair enough.
I think that's fair enough. Those words in that particular order don't mean a great deal to me. I'm struggling to pick out what he's actually talking about, to be honest. But I think the criticism is we've not created enough chances, and I don't think you can argue against that. The statistics will tell you we've had 70% possession in games and had one shot on target. There's no getting away from the fact that we haven't created enough decent chances. What the point that he's making, and it's reasonable, is that we've had the results. We're still third in the table, and unbeaten in 8 games now. So that's all positive. But I think it's fair that that transfer window was possibly one of the most ridiculous transfer windows that any of us as football fans, not just Burnley fans, will have probably experienced. There was no expectation that what happened was going to happen. So many players leaving, so many new players coming in. And I think it's reasonable for him to use that as not an excuse, but an explanation as to why
it is the context, isn't it? It is the context.
Yeah, as to why things haven't quite gelled. We've got. I think it's fair to say that I've got a sneaking suspicion that we've downgraded in a lot of those positions, and we're not quite we haven't quite got the potential that we had in the squad on day one of this season. But I think it's reasonable for him to use that as an explanation as to what's going on, and to suggest that it's going to take time. He's talked a little bit about the 2 weeks that he's had since the last game to work with the players. But if you think about it, even now, I think eight players who you might consider as expecting to be first choice have been away on international duty. So just exactly how much work they can do in that time and how effective that's going to be when they get on the pitch on Saturday, I don't know. But again, we go back to that. It's still very, very early days for this squad. It's still early days for this team. And we've got to give them the benefit of the doubt for the moment and just, hopefully we're going to see it gel a little bit. Hopefully we're going to see, and what better time to start doing that than this weekend?
Yeah, I think one of the most encouraging performances for me were the Leeds United one. To go away from home, and I think you're right. Counter-attacking, we look more dangerous than when we're playing against teams who defend deep and wait for us. But we had that fight and determination at Leeds. I still look at that one as a good sign coming, after a window that could have blown up most seasons. You're right. We've not seen it with many other clubs. It could have completely blown up the club. I mean, especially if you go back to when those interviews after the Sunderland game, when you had players like Esteve and Brownhill coming out going, we don't know whether we're coming or going here, who's going, what's going on. You're looking at, that could have, if that mood had stayed, we could be looking at a very, very different season. So yeah, I think it's fair to put it in that context. Scott Parker not tempted away by the English FA this week. We have to reflect a little bit on the international window and the fact that England have a new manager. The previous one didn't sound like whether he wanted the job or not half the time, did he really? It was a bit of a confused message coming from Lee Carsley, or maybe he knew the Tuchel deal had already been done. But it's caused quite a stir in football, hasn't it, the Thomas Tuchel appointment, because it touches a few raw nerves around the game. Chris, what's been your feeling about England having a German manager?
Well, his nationality, I couldn't give a monkeys, to be honest. But it's the age-old argument, isn't it? I saw Jamie Carragher again earlier today, sort of going on about, we should have an English manager. It should be the best of us against the best of them, and predominantly most of his caps came under a Swedish gentleman, and I just wonder. I wonder what his argument would have been had it been Klopp they'd appointed, because I think he'd have changed his tune somewhat. I'm not overly enamoured with it, purely because Tuchel is a good manager, and you read good and bad about him. He's achieved things. You can say, well, yeah, I could have done that with Bayern and PSG, etc. And and Roberto Di Matteo won a Champions League at Chelsea as well, sort of thing. But I just look at that. You've got Hansi Flick, who's at Barca. You've got obviously Klopp, who looks like he's moving upstairs at Red Bull, and Nagelsmann in charge of the national side. Is he even the best of what Germany's got to offer? I don't know. But on the other hand, I would have been quite keen to promote Carsley. You look at the success of the Spanish coach in the summer, and someone who, like Southgate, understands tournament football at international level. He's worked with a lot of the players, that he's currently, he's been working with the last couple of international windows. But like you say, his experiment against Greece was complete madness. And then you say his comments last week. I believe the contract was signed, the 8th of October. So maybe Carsley, he knew it was a done deal. And it didn't matter what he achieved last week. But to have Watkins and Solanke available and play a false nine, I just thought it was insulting. You're not playing Lithuania or Liechtenstein. You're playing Greece. And I know they're not an elite side, but they know what they're doing, as they proved on the night. Tactically they were superior. Technically they were superior. And the 3 goals disallowed, one incredible clearance off the line. They could have scored 5 or 6. It was embarrassing. And no, not good enough. Not good enough. But who are the best? The best thing. Eddie Howe looks like he wasn't even one of the 10 that the FA considered, and he wasn't leaving Newcastle. Potter has he had sufficient sort of exposure to that sort of level of football. The Chelsea thing didn't work particularly well, and then we're going into the only English managers in the Premier League, if I'm right, are Eddie and Sean Dyche, and they're clearly not going to entertain Sean Dyche. It's I think of all the top coaches the FA have produced over the last few years. I think they've come out with a lad that outlasted about 10, 12 games at Plymouth. They've Carsley, who's to all intents and purposes an Irishman, and Steve Cooper, who's Welsh. So, there isn't anyone emerging. So in that case, you take the best available, and Tuchel is technically, or as a free agent, who's the best available.
Well, that's a failure of the FA, isn't it, that there aren't any English candidates as well? You can point the finger at clubs, and definitely clubs prefer. There's an appeal to appointing a young Portuguese manager over a young English manager that seems to still be there in football, despite many of these managers failing. But the FA, the German FA have decided many years ago to have a policy of developing coaches, and they've come through really well. But the clubs help them by appointing German coaches. But Justin, Does nationality not matter in international football?
Well, of course it does. Of course it does. That's the whole point of it, isn't it? As everyone keeps saying, it's the best of us against the best of them. I think it's not a failure of the FA. I think it's a failure of the Premier League. You know, the Premier League has become, the English top flight has now become the world's league, hasn't it? You know, so the money attracts, and we've seen it on the playing side as much as we've seen it on the coaching side. The pool for English players is smaller than it once was because we attract all these foreign players. Coach wise, you're absolutely right, and most of the clubs are owned by foreign owners anyway. So it's not none these what we used to think of as the English league and English clubs. They're not really English anymore, only by virtue of where they are. Most of the players are foreign players. The ownership's all foreign players. Most of the coaches are foreign. Now, I've got nothing against that. That's fine. But it's we haven't got that sort of pathway to, getting English coaches into the game, as you said, the Germans have done. I agree with Chris. I think the place to do it, the place to groom that next England manager is in the England setup itself. So, Carsley to me would have been the better option. But at the end of the day, I have to say, I don't really care who the England manager is. I'm not really all that interested in international football anyway. I find it just to be a dreary sort of game after game of meaningless sort of nonsense. The only time it ever gets interesting is in the latter stages of the big tournaments when we get to the knockout games. So I find it difficult to get work. I mean, and also I'm not a massive fan of the jingoism that surrounds it. I mean, you've seen a perfect example of that with the appointment of Tuchel, haven't you? The reaction to it from the media asking him whether he's going to sing the national anthem. Of course, he's not going to sing the national. Why? And why is that even a thing? I rarely watch England games until they get to the tournament, so I'm not really that qualified to talk about it. But it seems like he's been given a really short contract, doesn't he? Just to the end of the next World Cup. So we've got a really talented bunch of players. We've got a manager who is pretty good at tweaking things during games. So you would hope that his sort of performance in tournaments might benefit from that. We're certainly one of the teams internationally who could win something. And this is a slightly different approach from what they've done previously, which is, I mean, some people look on Southgate's period as England manager as being successful. I suppose in some ways it was, but we never actually won anything, did we? Despite having, an enormous pool of talent to draw from. So it's something a bit different. So maybe you've just got to. I mean, the conversation over his nationality doesn't interest me at all. But I have to say, the Germans wouldn't appoint an Englishman as the manager of their national team. The Spanish wouldn't appoint an Englishman as the manager of their national team. The French wouldn't. The Italians definitely wouldn't. It's like one of those things, isn't it? Well, if it's international football and it's a representation of the country, then you would expect it to be somebody from that country in charge, wouldn't you? That seems a given to me.
It's a loophole, really, because, I mean, there's, people can get all sort of nervous about it sounding jingoistic and stuff, but the rules are you can't play for England unless you're qualified to play for England.
Exactly.
Which in practical terms mean that having a passport, yeah?
If you're a developing nation and you need a bit of help, we've all seen what's the film about the Dutch coach that goes out to, is it like American Samoa or something?
Oh,
like
Thomas
that?
Tuchel, yeah.
And
he's commentator down here at Inter Miami, actually. Yeah.
It's a really good, really good film. And it's if someone from another culture can sort of bring that, how many sort of French coaches have gone into to Africa over the last sort of 20 odd years or so.
Oh, yeah, it's gone on for as long as the games exist.
But we're not a developing nation, are we?
It used to be English managers going to Spain and going to Italy and taking the game to them. You know, it should. So it just seems weird that we. But like I say, it's a failure of the Premier League that we haven't got people with that sort of level of experience and that level of success that's required. Like Chris says, if you're looking at Premier League managers, there's only 2 to choose from out of the 20 clubs. You know, there's only 2 in there, and then Graham Potter, who essentially is available because arguably he was a failure at Chelsea. You know, there's not that bigger sort of list of candidates who are English available. So yeah, I mean, it's such a strange situation for England, like the birthplace of football, to be in. But I think that's probably part of the problem, isn't it?
You're right. The Premier League's a global product that happens to take place in the British Isles, isn't it? I mean, Woody, I just wanted to, are you getting a bit more riled up about this than these two?
Absolutely not. But you look to basically everybody's pretty much said it. But when you look at the league titles won by domestic managers since '92, Serie A 90% Italian, Bundesliga 75% German, League One 72%, La Liga 44%, Premier League 0%. So we haven't a talent pool. So you're talking about, well, are we going to progress with the culture that this blueprint that we've started with Southgate that's been successful in a lot of regards, or do you bring somebody in to get a tune out of your players, which theoretically Thomas Tuchel should be able to do. And Thomas Tuchel does have a CV of being able to win Champions Leagues, progress through cups with top sides and get a tune out of players for that type of a tournament. So it's one of those. Do you want results, or do you want to develop a modern culture for English football? Because the Premier League doesn't reflect that. It really isn't that. So if we're arguing that, we've arguably got a good guy to get a tune out of these Premier League players. So he should do relatively well, or as well as anybody. But I'm not going to get too bent out of shape. We'll crash out semi-finals. And that'll be that.
I do think we need to do something about the thing with English coaches, though, because if you look at European football, if you look at the era before the Premier League existed and before the clubs were taken over by foreigners, playing staff populated by them and coached by them, then look at the record in European football.
Yeah.
Tony Barton was Aston Villa manager who won the European Cup. Most people have never even heard of Tony Barton these days. He won the European Cup with a mostly team of English players, British players, right? Arsene Wenger never won the European Cup with Arsenal. No. I mean, he's credited with all these wonderful developments in English football, most of which are true. He did have a revolutionary impact on the game and everything. But Tony Barton won the European Cup. He didn't. Yeah. Bob Paisley won the European Cup. Joe Fagan, I think, or Ronnie Moran,
Yeah, Joe Fagan's the last Englishman to win the European Cup, and he managed Nelson.
There you go.
So that's how,
I tell you what, one of the biggest ironies of the whole thing is, had Bobby Robson not taken England to the semi-finals of Italia '90, the Premier League probably wouldn't even exist, because that was the real renaissance moment for English football to get beyond the hooliganism of the sort of 80s and stuff. And the fact that he achieved that and reignited that sort of idea of the English game being something that people might want to watch, and that success and what it led to is basically the Premier League that doesn't really nurture English talent on the pitch or off the pitch.
But even going back to that, though, if you look back, obviously, Bobby Robson. If you ask any Englishman's opinion of Bobby Robson, they'll tell you, he's a magnificent manager. He's a Saint Bobby, Sir Bobby, and everyone loved him. But he obviously he was an exceptional coach. He coached Ronaldo, didn't he, at PSV? He was at Barcelona. He, obviously did a good job at Newcastle, etc. Ipswich many moons before that. But the press were gunning for him. They were gunning for him after Euro '88 when we were a shambles. you lose to Ireland, you got humiliated by Holland, and went home with the tails between the legs. And in Italia 90, like I said, they draw with Ireland, draw with Holland, and squeak past Egypt. And the players ultimately decided, we want to change the formation here. And the players enforced that. And I don't think it was anything that Bobby Robson did. That they get to the, I think everyone at the FA basically said, we've drawn Cameroon. It's like a bye, and it was probably the toughest game of the tournament. But people look at Bobby Robson and the Italia 90 with these rose-tinted glasses, and Southgate. Maybe in time he'll get that. Because I never thought I'd see England playing a major tournament final. And I've seen them in 2. I mean, they might not have brought it home, I think it was the time for him to go. But I think what he's built in 8 years, and this, getting to 2 finals and a World Cup semi-final, he gets absolutely no thanks for it. Yeah.
I think the thing about it goes back to what you said before, Chris. Managing in a tournament is different to managing a club, isn't it? It's a totally different thing. So when we say, there isn't anybody in the Premier League, it's like, is success in the Premier League really an indicator of whether somebody could take over a national team and do well with them, or should we be sort of nurturing that coaching talent within the system? Obviously, they're trying something different, aren't they? But it does sort of feel to me a little bit like they've sort of decided the last 8 years were a failure, and. No, you don't think you
could say about it. I think what Southgate was missing. Chris has made a fair point. I think what he was missing was, if you look at those big games, Southgate got it wrong in the in-game management. Right?
Yeah,
there's no doubt about that. The Italy game was like, Mancini made his moves and Southgate was like a rabbit in the headlights and didn't do anything. Same happened with Croatia in the Russia World Cup. So they might be. The justification for it might be, I instinctively don't like the idea of Thomas Tuchel being England manager, but the justification for it might be, we've got a great bunch of players. Southgate, in my opinion, should have won something with them. A better manager would have won something with them, I think. Maybe we bring him in on a short-term contract. Can he be the difference? Can he be the guy that when a Roberto Mancini makes his substitutions, he's already one step ahead of Mancini, not 10 minutes behind him when you already conceded a goal, or give that degree of positivity, just that bit that's been missing. And you might be turning around, and it's really unkind in a way for Gareth Southgate, but people might be turning around and going, Gareth Southgate's team won the World Cup in 2026, but it needed Thomas Tuchel to get it over the line. If that works, then fair enough. And it's a short-term contract, and you can go back to building England DNA and projects and Lee Carsley type appointments after that, because you've got a World Cup in the bag, and we'll be all right for another 60 years then.
We'll not let him go. If it wins the World Cup, they'll not let him go, will they? There'll be a clamour.
Oh my goodness, 10-year contract. Yeah. Oh yeah. Fabio Capello's agent will be on the phone to that.
He'll be on the fourth. He'll be on the fourth plinth in Trafalgar Square, won't he?
Oh yeah, we'll give him Second World War and everything, won't we?
Yeah. With his tight fitting tracksuit trousers on. Yeah.
Oh well, we gave him Vincent Kompany in return, didn't we? So
bargain.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, a bit of England chat, a bit unusual for us, but it is an unusual story, and we will be back with exclusively Burnley chat, I suspect, on Monday when we look back in our debrief of our performance at Sheffield Wednesday. Don't forget those limited edition merchandise items are still available in the shop for a short while. So get yourself in there and have a look at that hoodie, which costs significantly less than other hoodies that have the word Burnley on it. Have a good weekend and up the Clarets.